small-scale agriculture versus industrial agriculture, and why I personally think that we should switch to small-scale agriculture. And there might be a few technical words, but hopefully it should be fairly general. So if everyone's ready, then I'll start now. Okay, so I'm going to give you a speech on why I think we should switch to small-scale agriculture. And I think this is quite a timely subject in the context of the current pandemic, when we're seeing that in the shops there are shortages of some basic food products. And it really does raise questions about the fragility of our food supply system. And also on a personal level, I've recently been reading the book The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, which some of you may have read. And it was a very thought-provoking read, which really raised some questions for me about the link that humanity has with the land and nature, and how machines have come between humanity and nature and have brought about a misunderstanding of how our food is produced and how we should look after nature to ensure that it can continue producing the food that we need. This novel was set in the context of the Dust Bowl catastrophe in the American Midwest in the 1930s, which was a 10-year drought brought about not only by insufficient rainfall, but also by unsuitable farming methods which did not suit the soil type. And I think this is particularly relevant at the moment because experts believe that over the next few years we could see a new dust bowl forming due to the effects of global warming. Now, there are currently 7.7 billion of us on the Earth, and of course we all need to eat. And I've often heard it said that we need to use industrial farming methods to ensure that we can all have enough to eat, and that it's in fact a necessary evil. I hope that in this speech you'll realise why this is actually not the case. So we should probably start with a definition of small-scale and industrial agriculture. Small-scale agriculture is defined as biodiverse production methods where several different crops are grown together without the use of advanced technology, and instead using intensive human labour. It often takes the form of subsistence agriculture, and it doesn't use artificial fertilisers or pesticides. It instead uses natural techniques such as crop rotation, companion planting, etc., to work in order to build up the soil quality over the years. Industrial farming, on the other hand, is characterised by large-scale monoculture. That is to say that the same crop is grown on large expanses of land year in, year out, and this system relies on the use of artificial fertilisers and pesticides, which we all know how bad these are for the soil and the environment. They lead to biodiversity loss, they deplete the soil. Over recent years, they've come to rely heavily on genetically modified organisms. Animal agriculture leads to antibiotic resistance. There's a whole host of negative impacts. And something which is less known is that it actually leads to monopolies on seeds, as large companies are able to take out patents on seed types, which means that farmers then depend on these large companies to buy the seed that they need, rather than being able to reuse the seed that comes from their own crops. The emergence of industrial farming can be dated back to the year 1901, and since the emergence of this, we have actually lost around 75% of world crop species. So in the light of all this information, you might think that small-scale agriculture seems eminently preferable. And something else that just adds to this observation is that, in fact, a quarter of the world's food is currently produced under industrial agricultural systems, and this uses 3/4 of the available land and water resources, whereas 3/4 of the world's food is produced with small-scale agriculture, using only 1/4 of the world's resources. So it seems that small-scale agriculture can actually be even more productive. This is because it's better integrated with the environment, and it grows crops which are more suitable for the local soil type, rather than crops purely to meet market demand. Crops are also grown together, as I said, using companion planting, which provides a natural resistance to pests and disease. The more intense labour means that problems can be literally nipped in the bud when they arise. And there's also better use of space because there is not this reliance on machinery, which dictates how far crops can be planted from each other. So we might wonder why industrial agriculture is the dominant model in Europe, when it seems that not only does it pollute the environment, but it's actually less productive. To understand this, we need to have a quick look back over the agricultural revolutions that have taken place over the years. Now, the first of these took place around the year 10,000 BC, when we switched from nomadic hunter-gatherer populations to sedentary farming communities. But for the purposes of this speech, we won't go into detail on this one. The second agricultural revolution took place between the 17th and the 19th century, and it involved a switch from a feudal agricultural system to a capitalist system. Under the feudal system, tenants lived on the land and had the right to farm it, and land ownership was not a widely known concept. Then came the rise of capitalism, the concept of land ownership, which led to privatisation of the land. Tenants were kicked off the land and in due course found themselves part of a landless peasant underclass, which was forced to flee to cities and provided the labour needed for the Industrial Revolution. This was the start of a process known as land consolidation, in which farmland and agriculture in general becomes controlled by an ever smaller number of people. The third agricultural revolution is one that you might have heard of. It's also known as the Green Revolution, and this took place starting from the 1950s, or a little before this. And this revolution involved greater use of technology, such as high-yielding seeds in conjunction with fertilizers and pesticides, increased mechanization of farms, controlled water supplies, including irrigation techniques, and generally marked a shift to large-scale agriculture instead of subsistence farming, especially in developing countries. This also reaped huge profits for American agribusiness and agrochemical companies. It also, more importantly, marked a shift from agriculture powered by human labour to agriculture powered by oil, so transitioning from a renewable system to a non-renewable system. We're now on the cusp of a fourth agricultural revolution, which goes hand in hand with the fourth industrial revolution and indeed relies on much of the same technology. In fact, the World Economic Forum published a fairly dystopian report on this in 2018, which details how automatic decision-making technology will be used to create farms which no longer rely on human input, how we will use genome editing and microbiome technology to create more resistant crops, how we'll use artificial insect viruses to control insect populations. Now, I'm sure in the current context we can all see why this is a very bad idea. And in general, it describes how agriculture will be taken out of the hands of the population and will be controlled by big data, which can be manipulated by large companies, governments, or hackers if they manage to get their hands on it. When I read this report, I was quite shocked to see the direction that our agriculture seems to be moving in. And to sum up the trend that seems to have marked agriculture over the last 100 years or so, it's been controlled by ever fewer stakeholders, it's been dictated by market demand rather than what is truly sustainable, and it's worked against nature rather than with nature. But of course, we need to find a way of ensuring that food production keeps pace with the growth of the population. But as I see it, we can either continue on the current pathway, which seems to be leading to our impending doom. We can continue with our vulnerable societies where most of us live in cities and rely on food just coming to our table. This system depends on oil, however. We're so highly dependent on oil that if it would only take a small petrol crisis to send our farming techniques and our supply systems tumbling down, and well, the results of this just don't bear thinking about. So we can continue with this pathway, or we can reduce our dependence on oil. We can stop using this large machinery. We can replace it with human labour. We can downsize farms. We can use wasteland in cities or around cities, make it into small agricultural projects. And in this way, we'll shorten the supply chains. And we can ensure that techniques that respect the environment and the ecosystem are used, such as permaculture or agroforestry. In this way, we would see a revival of the agricultural sector, and it would come to be seen as a rewarding career choice. But to do this, we would need a shift in the way we view our food, not just as something that appears on our table by magic, but something that we contribute to producing. We could even implement an agricultural service for young people rather than a military service, where young people would spend a year in the countryside learning how to produce and grow their own food. To become food secure, we need to go back to a system where we work in symbiosis with nature rather than in competition with it. We need to learn how to preserve and protect the land rather than exploit it for our immediate needs with no thought for the future. This would make us not only more food secure, but also happier, as there is a proven link between time spent in nature and our mood. And recent studies have even shown that contact with soil allows a mood-enhancing microbe to enter our bloodstream, and this has a natural antidepressant effect. So perhaps this symbiosis goes even further than we previously thought. So in conclusion, it is time for a fourth agricultural revolution, but not one which increases our dependence on external factors. It needs to be one which restores the link between humanity and nature. And that is the end of my speech.